On an ordinary evening, the small town seemed calm as it always did. Families sat down to dinner, shop owners closed their stores, and children played in the fading sunlight. It was the kind of place where nothing unusual ever seemed to happen, where safety was taken for granted, and the streets felt familiar to everyone. Yet that calmness was about to be broken by something that would leave the entire community unsettled. A young woman finished her shift at work and headed toward the parking lot where her car was parked. It was a routine she had followed countless times before, nothing remarkable, nothing different. But this time, she would never make it home. Her co-workers recalled seeing her leave in good spirits, carrying her bag and waving goodbye. There was nothing in her behavior that suggested worry or fear. She stepped out into the cool air, walked across the lot, and then nothing. Hours later, when her family realized she hadn't come back, they began to call her phone. The device rang, but no one answered. At first, it seemed like a small delay, perhaps a flat tire, perhaps an errand. But as the hours stretched into night, concern turned into dread. By morning, her car was still in the same spot untouched. On the ground beside it lay only her keys, as if they had slipped from her hand mid-step. The police were called immediately, and an official search began. Officers combed through the area, scanning the parking lot, the sidewalks, and the nearby woods. Dogs were brought in to track her scent, but the trail seemed to vanish as quickly as she had. No sign of a struggle, no blood, no discarded belongings. The silence of the scene was chilling. It was as though she had simply dissolved into the air, leaving behind nothing but questions. For investigators, this was more than concerning. Disappearances rarely happen without leaving even a trace. News spread rapidly through the town. Parents held their children closer, and neighbors began locking their doors earlier in the evening. Conversations in grocery stores and coffee shops circled around the same haunting thought: if it could happen to her, it could happen to anyone. The idea of a predator roaming freely sent ripples of fear through every household. But beneath the fear was confusion. How could someone vanish so quietly in a town where everyone knew one another, where strangers stood out immediately? Detectives worked around the clock, checking surveillance cameras from nearby businesses and gas stations. Hours of footage were reviewed, yet nothing definitive emerged. The last image of her showed her walking calmly toward her car, unaware of what awaited. Then the recording ended, and she was gone. The case quickly became more than just a local matter. State investigators were called in, and the FBI began monitoring the situation. The press arrived, swarming the small community with questions, cameras, and speculation. For her family, the wait was unbearable. Each passing day without answers deepened their fear and sharpened their grief. Volunteers joined the search, combing through fields, rivers, and abandoned structures. Posters with her face appeared on every corner, every streetlight, and every store window. Yet no matter how hard they searched, the same unsettling reality lingered. She had vanished without a sound, without a witness, without a clue. The disappearance was not just a missing person case. It was the beginning of something darker, a story that would unravel far beyond what anyone in that quiet town could have expected. The unanswered questions grew heavier and the fear more tangible. Something was lurking in the shadows, and it had already claimed its first victim. Detectives began retracing every step of her final day, determined to uncover what had happened in those critical moments before she disappeared. They started with the obvious, her workplace. Colleagues were questioned one by one, but nothing suspicious was uncovered. She had left in her usual cheerful mood, chatting casually about her weekend plans. From there, investigators followed her path to the parking lot, examining every possible detail that might have been overlooked. Tire marks were analyzed, fingerprints were lifted from her car door, and even the smallest scraps of paper were bagged as evidence. Yet each clue seemed to lead nowhere. Attention then turned to surveillance footage from nearby streets and businesses. Hours of recordings were studied, with detectives pausing and rewinding endlessly, searching for the missing puzzle piece. For a while, it seemed the cameras had failed them. Then, late one night, an investigator noticed something unusual. In a grainy corner of the footage, a figure appeared, trailing behind the young woman as she walked toward her car. The person's head was lowered, hidden beneath a hood. At first glance, it looked like nothing more than an anonymous passerby, but the longer the detective studied the video, the more unsettling it became. The movements were deliberate, the pace calculated, as though the figure knew exactly where she was going and waited for the right moment. The discovery changed everything. This was no random disappearance. Someone had been watching her, following her, and likely knew her routine well. Detectives released still images of the shadowy figure to the public, urging anyone who recognized the stance, the clothing, or the walk to come forward. Yet days passed, and no one claimed to know who it was. Whispers spread through the town. Some believed it was a stranger, someone who had slipped in unnoticed. Others feared the truth was far worse, that the figure might be someone from their own community, a familiar face hiding behind a mask of normalcy. The police worked tirelessly to identify the unknown person. They analyzed the height, the body language, even the stride, comparing it with known offenders in the region. But no match surfaced. Every lead ended in frustration. In the meantime, the family of the missing woman watched helplessly as speculation grew. Neighbors eyed one another with suspicion, and long-standing friendships began to fracture under the weight of doubt. Media coverage only fueled the unease. Headlines described a silent predator, a town in fear, and an investigation racing against time. Each broadcast emphasized the haunting fact that the woman's disappearance had happened in near silence, with no cries for help and no witnesses. How could someone be taken so swiftly in such a public space? For detectives, the figure on the footage became both a lifeline and a torment. It was proof that she had not simply wandered off, but also a reminder of how close they were to an answer they could not yet reach. Somewhere in that blurred image was the identity of a predator who had already shown the ability to vanish into the crowd. The mystery deepened, and the town braced itself for what would come next. As the weeks dragged on, hope for finding the missing woman alive began to fade, but investigators pressed forward, unwilling to let the case fall cold. Why? They shifted their focus from her final moments to her personal life, searching for patterns, secrets, or anything that might explain why she had been targeted. Her home was carefully examined, every notebook and every device scrutinized. What they uncovered surprised them all. Hidden inside her desk drawer was a collection of handwritten journals filled with notes, newspaper clippings, and detailed timelines. She had been researching unsolved disappearances from the past 2 decades. The entries revealed a troubling obsession. She had mapped out cases of young women vanishing under mysterious circumstances, many of them within a short radius of her hometown. Some had disappeared on their way home from work, others while running errands or walking alone at night. In nearly every case, the women left behind no clear evidence and were never found. Her notes highlighted similarities between the cases, pointing out patterns that investigators at the time had overlooked. It was clear she had been piecing together a puzzle that stretched far beyond her own disappearance. Detectives began cross-referencing her notes with official records, and the results were chilling. The details aligned too closely to ignore. A series of disappearances that had been treated as isolated incidents now appeared connected. Some victims had been last seen in nearly identical circumstances to hers, with belongings left behind but no trace of their bodies. The missing woman's journal suggested she believed someone was orchestrating these crimes carefully, methodically, and without drawing attention. The revelation shifted the investigation. It was no longer about a single missing person, but a potential serial predator operating undetected for years. Detectives revisited old files, digging through forgotten evidence boxes and cold case archives. The deeper they went, the more disturbing the picture became. Witness accounts from years earlier described strange figures seen near crime scenes, but the details had been dismissed at the time as unreliable. The missing woman's research had pulled those fragments together, and in doing so, may have exposed a dangerous truth. For the community, the idea was horrifying. What they thought had been isolated tragedies now formed a dark thread running through their history. Families of past victims resurfaced, grieving all over again as they realized their loved ones had likely been part of a much larger story. The quiet town that once prided itself on safety was now viewed as a place where someone had hunted in plain sight, blending into the background while lives were stolen one by one. Investigators began to wonder if the missing woman had realized too much. Her research was detailed, meticulous, and pointed toward someone with a frightening level of control. If she had uncovered something threatening to expose the predator, that knowledge might have sealed her fate. Instead of simply being another victim, she may have been silenced for getting too close to the truth. What had once been a mystery of a single disappearance now unfolded into a terrifying pattern. The past had not been buried. It was still alive, breathing, and lurking within the shadows of the community. Each unanswered question from years before now took on new urgency. Somewhere, the person responsible was still watching, still hiding, and still waiting for the right moment to strike again. The search took a devastating turn when a group of volunteers combing the outskirts of town stumbled across something half buried in the woods. At first, it looked like nothing more than disturbed soil, perhaps the work of an animal. But as they dug deeper, a horrifying discovery came into focus. The shallow grave contained human remains, hastily covered and concealed beneath fallen leaves and branches. Authorities were called immediately, and the area was sealed off as investigators descended on the scene. What they found was worse than anyone had imagined. The missing woman was there, her body hidden in a way that spoke of both urgency and calculation. Alongside her were items that did not belong to her: jewelry, scraps of clothing, and personal objects later identified as belonging to other women who had vanished years before. The grave was not only a final resting place for her, but a collective burial ground, a silent archive of crimes stretching back far longer than anyone had suspected. For investigators, it was the moment that turned speculation into undeniable proof. They were not searching for answers to a single tragedy. They were staring into the face of a serial predator who had left a trail of victims hidden in plain sight. Forensic teams worked tirelessly, carefully cataloging every item. DNA analysis confirmed the horrifying reality. The missing woman's fate was linked to several unsolved disappearances. Each object told a story of another life cut short, another family left with questions that had gone unanswered for years. The realization that the predator had operated undetected for so long was almost unbearable for the community. Fear mixed with outrage as residents demanded answers. How had so many cases been overlooked? How could someone have hidden among them all these years without drawing suspicion? Then came the most shocking revelation of all. The evidence recovered from the site pointed back to a figure no one would have expected. DNA traces, combined with a series of careful forensic matches, led to someone highly respected within the town. This was not a stranger drifting through the area, nor an outsider preying from the shadows. It was someone the community had trusted, a person whose face was familiar, whose reputation had seemed beyond question. The image of safety and respectability had hidden something monstrous. When news of the suspect's identity broke, disbelief rippled through the town. Neighbors, who had once exchanged friendly greetings, now questioned every memory they had of this individual. People remembered small things, moments that once seemed harmless, but now felt sinister in hindsight. The mask had slipped, and what lay beneath was unthinkable. The predator had not only lived among them, but had thrived on their trust, using it as a shield to commit unspeakable acts. The discovery of the gravesite did more than solve a mystery. It shattered the illusion of safety that had defined the town for generations. The community was forced to reckon with a truth far darker than they were prepared for. Evil had not come from the outside. It had lived beside them, wearing the face of the ordinary, waiting for its secrets to remain undisturbed. But now, those secrets had been unearthed, and the town would never look the same again. The arrest sent shockwaves through the town, spreading from door to door, whispered in disbelief among neighbors who could hardly accept the truth. Cameras crowded the courthouse steps as reporters broadcast the story across the nation, turning the once quiet community into the focus of a chilling narrative. The person they had trusted for years, a figure who had blended seamlessly into everyday life, was led away in handcuffs. The image burned into the minds of residents, a reminder that appearances could be deceiving and that darkness often wore a familiar face. As investigators dug deeper into the case, a disturbing picture emerged. The crimes had not been acts of impulse or sudden violence. They were calculated, meticulously planned, and carried out with a precision that spoke of cold intent. Victims had been watched, their routines studied, and their vulnerabilities exploited. The predator's ability to move undetected for so long was not just skill, but manipulation. Every smile, every handshake, every gesture of kindness had been a disguise, hiding a mind capable of cruelty few could comprehend. For the families of the victims, the discovery was a painful mix of closure and devastation. At last, they had answers to questions that had haunted them for years, but those answers carried unbearable weight. Objects recovered from the grave were returned, each one a silent reminder of lives cut short and memories stolen. The missing woman's family, who had fought tirelessly for her return, now faced the reality that her pursuit of truth had led her directly into danger. She had uncovered the hidden pattern, but in doing so, she had become the final piece of it. Foe. In the community, fear slowly gave way to reflection. People replayed past encounters in their minds, wondering how they could have missed the signs. There were no obvious warnings, no moments that pointed clearly to danger. That was what made the revelation so terrifying. The predator had been ordinary, approachable, and trusted. The illusion of safety was shattered, leaving residents questioning not only their judgment but the very fabric of the world they lived in. If such darkness could thrive in plain sight here, then where else might it be hiding? The trial drew nationwide attention. Each detail revealed in court only deepened the sense of horror. Testimony painted a portrait of a person who had studied the very idea of trust, weaponizing it against those around them. The verdict was inevitable, but justice, though delivered, felt incomplete. No sentence could erase the years of suffering or bring back the lives that had been lost. In the aftermath, the town struggled to rebuild its sense of identity. Memorials were held for the victims, their names spoken aloud so they would never again fade into silence, but the deeper scars remained. The story became a cautionary tale, a reminder that humanity carries two faces, the one it shows the world and the one hidden in shadows. Beneath the surface of the ordinary can lie the unimaginable, and the line between safety and betrayal is far thinner than anyone dares to believe. The community moved forward, but it did so with eyes wide open, forever changed by the knowledge of what had been living among them.